The human recreation chamber aboard the joint expeditionary vessel Stellaris was an assault on Cathar sensibilities. It was a pocket of deliberate, pointless chaos stitched into the otherwise elegant and logical design of the starship. To xenolinguist Xyler, whose role was to observe and comprehend the baffling species cohabiting their vessel, the room was a constant source of profound intellectual discomfort. The air, recycled with a higher oxygen and nitrogen mix to suit human biology, carried the faint, organic sense of sweat and synthetic food flavorings. The lighting was often too bright or too dim, fluctuating with the whims of human entertainment simulations. And then there was the noise. Today, the noise was laughter. It was a percussive, unrestrained sound that echoed off the metallic bulkheads, a stark contrast to the harmonious, low-frequency hum that permeated the Cathar sections of the ship. Xyler stood near the entryway, his four slender arms held close to his body, the smaller secondary pair resting on his chest in a gesture of passive observation. His carapace, a smooth, chitinous shell that covered his lanky frame, held a steady, neutral shade of muted gray, but the tips of his sensitive antennae twitched with every fresh outburst from the humans. In the center of the zero-gravity chamber, 4 of them were engaged in a ritual they called Dodge Fear. The rules appeared to be deceptively simple. Hurl a soft, brightly colored orb at your opponents while avoiding being struck yourself. The practice, however, was anything but simple. It was a maelstrom of flailing limbs, acrobatic contortions, and shouted taunts. Pilot Jax, a young male with a shock of unruly hair, spun through the air, his face contorted in a wide grin as he launched the sphere at Commander Rostova. "Too slow, Commander. The nebula will have eaten us by the time that one gets there," he yelled. Rostova, their leader, caught the sphere with one hand, her momentum barely shifting. Her expression was one of amused tolerance, but her eyes held a glint that Xyler had come to recognize as a precursor to some unpredictable action. She didn't throw the sphere back immediately. Instead, she used a handhold to pivot, braced herself against the wall, and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "You know, Jax, for a pilot who claims to have the fastest reflexes this side of the Sol system, you talk an awful lot." Jax puffed out his chest. "It's not bragging if you can back it up." "Is that so?" Rostova's smile didn't change, but it seemed to sharpen at the edges. With a movement too quick for Xyler to fully process, she didn't throw the sphere, she punched it. Her fist connected with the pliable surface, launching it with a velocity far greater than any of the previous throws. The sphere blurred across the chamber and struck Jax squarely in the chest. His bravado vanished in an undignified squawk as he tumbled backward, pinwheeling through the zero-gravity environment until he bumped gently into the far wall. The other 2 humans, Engineer Maya and Dr. Aris Thorne, erupted in peals of laughter. Even Jax, after a moment of stunned silence, joined in, his laughter mingling with a theatrical groan. All right, I yield. Point to the commander." Rostova simply floated back to the center of the room, her expression serene once more. "Let that be a lesson in applied physics, pilot, action versus reaction." Xyler's mandibles clicked softly, a subconscious expression of his confusion. He had recorded the interaction for later analysis, but the raw data was a paradox. An exchange of mild insults, a display of what could be interpreted as aggression, followed by a collective outburst of rhythmic, barking sounds signifying pleasure. Approval. It was illogical. A superior officer had publicly bested a subordinate with physical force, however minor. In Cathar culture, such an act would have demanded a formal apology and a recalibration of social standing. For the humans, it was a source of amusement. It was a game. But where was the line between the game and reality? Xyler had reviewed thousands of hours of human historical data, and that line seemed to be written in sand, constantly washed away by tides of emotion. His internal translator parsed the human sounds, cross-referencing them with his growing lexicon of their chaotic language. Laughter, a physiological response to humor, relief, or joy. But here, it seemed to be a response to a minor act of violence. It was a contradiction he could not resolve. Later, he found Dr. Thorne in the hydroponics bay, a verdant, humid space that was another testament to human strangeness. While the Cathar subsisted on nutrient paste, synthesized from inorganic materials. The humans insisted on cultivating living organisms for consumption. They called it food, and seemed to derive immense pleasure from its varied textures and flavors. Thorn was tending to a row of leafy green plants, his hands moving with a gentle precision that seemed at odds with the boisterous man from the recreation chamber. "Dr. Thorn," Xyler began, his synthesized voice a smooth baritone. "May I pose a query regarding the earlier social interaction?" Aris Thorn looked up, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. He had a kind face etched with fine lines that deepened when he smiled. "Of course, Xyler, ask away, still trying to figure out our brand of crazy." "The term crazy implies a deviation from rational thought." "I am attempting to find the rationality," Xyler corrected gently. Commander Rostova struck Pilot Jax. This was framed as a contest, yet it contained elements of aggression. The response from all present was mirth. "It is a conflicting data set." Thorn chuckled, a much softer sound than the one from the game. He plucked a leaf from a plant and examined it. "It's about context, Xyler, we play fight. It's a way to build camaraderie, to establish a pecking order without any real harm." Jax was being cocky. Eva put him in his place, but she did it in a way that was funny, not malicious. By laughing, Jax showed he understood and accepted it. It's a social lubricant. A lubricant for what mechanism? For stress, for hierarchy, for the fact that we're all stuck in this metal can millions of light years from home, Thorn said, his tone turning more serious. He gestured to the plants around them. "We grow these because we need a connection to something living, something that reminds us of Earth. We laugh at stupid things because the alternative is to be crushed by the silence and the scale of it all. The commander is the best at it. She knows how to keep the crew's morale high. The jokes, the games, they're just as important as the engine maintenance schedules." Xyler processed this. It was a logical explanation in its own way. Emotion as a tool for maintaining operational efficiency. Yet, it felt incomplete. He had seen Commander Rostova in other contexts. He had seen her during tactical simulations, her face a mask of cold calculation, her voice devoid of all warmth as she sacrificed simulated crew members to achieve a strategic objective. The same woman who laughed while punching a sphere at a subordinate could, moments later, calmly state, "Expendable losses. The objective is paramount." How could one being contain both the playful warmth and the chilling, ruthless pragmatism? To the Cathar, whose actions were governed by a clear, consistent code of logic and communal benefit, such duality was not just strange. It was deeply unsettling. It suggested a mind that was not whole, a personality that could fracture under pressure. And on a mission as critical as this first joint interstellar voyage, a fractured mind in command was the most dangerous variable of all. The tips of his antennae twitched again, not with curiosity this time, but with a nascent, unfamiliar tremor of apprehension. He was beginning to suspect that the greatest danger on their journey was not in the uncharted stars ahead, but in the unpredictable hearts of the allies floating beside them. The weekly strategic briefing was held in the command nexus, a circular room where the ship's two design philosophies met in a jarring but functional fusion. On one side, the Cathar command stations were integrated into the bulkhead itself, consoles of smooth, dark material that glowed with soft, amber light. The operators sat in form-fitting biochairs, their four hands moving in economical, precise patterns across the controls. On the other side, the human stations were a jumble of freestanding monitors, exposed conduits, and utilitarian chairs bolted to the deck. It was a physical representation of the two cultures, Cathar integration versus human modularity. Captain Vorlag, the Cathar commander, stood at the central holographic projector. He was taller than Xyler, his carapace a deep, authoritative obsidian. His voice, when it came through the translator, was a low rumble that commanded attention. The hologram depicted a swirling nebula, a cosmic cloud of violent reds and ethereal blues they were scheduled to survey. "Our long-range scans of the Cygnus X1 filamentary nebula show anomalous energy signatures," Vorlag stated, one of his primary hands gesturing toward a pulsating point of light within the hologram. "They are not consistent with any known stellar phenomena. The energy is patterned, almost rhythmic, Our primary objective is to approach to a safe distance, deploy a deep scan probe, and analyze the source without risking the Stellaris. His plan was, as always, meticulously logical. It minimized risk at every stage. It was a plan built on caution and data. Commander Rostova, standing opposite him, leaned forward, her eyes narrowed at the hologram. Rhythmic, you say? Like a heartbeat. Or a transmission. The pattern is too complex for a simple pulse, Voreg replied, a hint of dismissal in his tone. But too chaotic for a coherent transmission. It is merely an anomaly. Anomalies are what we're out here to find, Rostova said, a faint smile on her lips. No point in being shy about it. I suggest a more aggressive approach. We take the Stellaris in on a low-power run, using the denser gas clouds for sensor cover. Get a closer look before we send in the probe. The probe is delicate. A gravimetric shear could tear it apart. The ship is tougher. Tessic, the Cathar chief engineer, made a series of sharp, agitated clicks. His carapace, always a pale, sickly yellow that Xyler associated with chronic irritation, seemed to brighten. Commander, your suggestion is illogical. It needlessly exposes the entire vessel to unknown forces. The protocol for encountering Class 4 energy phenomena is clear. Observation from a minimum of 0.3 astronomical units. Rostova turned her gaze to Tessic. Her smile didn't falter, but it lost all its warmth. Protocols are guidelines, Chief. They're the training wheels. Sometimes you have to take them off to win the race, or, in this case, to find out if there's even a race to be won. She looked back at the hologram, her expression now one of intense focus. Could also be a space kraken. We should be prepared for that. A heavy silence filled the Cathar side of the room. Xyler's translator cycled through its cultural subroutines, trying to find a corollary for space kraken. It offered. Mythological Terran aquatic cephalopod of immense size, often used as a metaphor for an imagined, insurmountable obstacle. It was a joke in the middle of a serious tactical discussion about a potentially hazardous mission. The incongruity was jarring. Captain Vorlag's mandibles tightened, a clear sign of disapproval. Commander Rostova, Vorlag's voice was dangerously quiet. Your levity is unhelpful. We are discussing the safety of this crew. All 642 lives, both Cathar and human. I'm deadly serious, Captain, Rostova shot back, her tone now as sharp as broken glass. The playful persona had vanished, replaced in an instant by the cold strategist Xyler had witnessed in simulations. Humor is a tool, not a distraction. It reminds us that the unknown is not just to be feared, but to be met with curiosity. But my point stands. A passive scan from a third of an AU away will tell us what we already know. There's something weird in there. A closer approach gives us real-time, high-fidelity data that could be the difference between discovery and disaster. It's a calculated risk, and I say it's one worth taking. The debate continued for another hour. It was a perfect microcosm of their partnership. The Cathar argued for probability, safety, and adherence to established procedure. The humans, led by Rostova, argued for opportunism, risk assessment, and the value of direct, intuitive action. In the end, a compromise was reached, as it often was. They would approach closer than Vorlag wanted, but not as close as Rostova had proposed. As the meeting adjourned, Xyler remained behind, ostensibly to review the holographic logs. He watched as Rostova clapped Jax on the shoulder, the pilot who had been the butt of her joke just days before. "Get ready to fly through some soup, Jax," she said, her voice light again. "Try not to scratch the paint. Only if you promise to navigate us out from the belly of the beast when the Kraken gets us," he retorted with a grin. They laughed, and the sound seemed to mock the sterile logic of the command nexus. Xyler felt a shiver run through his body, a primal response his species had evolved to detect environmental instability. That was what the humans were. They were an element of instability. They could pivot from grim tactical analysis to jokes about mythical monsters in the span of a single breath. He could not reconcile the two. Was the humor a mask for the ruthlessness? Or was the ruthlessness a product of a mind that treated everything, even mortal danger, as a kind of cosmic joke? He keyed his datapad, opening a new entry in his private log on human behavior. He labeled it, "The Paradox of Tonal Incongruity." It was a sterile, scientific term for a feeling that was growing deeper and more visceral with each passing day. It was the feeling of standing on solid ground, only to realize it was a thin crust over a churning, unpredictable magma. And Commander Rostova was the epicenter of the quake. The Joint Tactical Simulation was a monthly exercise designed to ensure the two crews could function as a single, cohesive unit in a crisis. The scenario for this cycle was a catastrophic failure of the primary reactor while under attack from a hostile, unknown vessel. It was a worst-case scenario, designed to test command structures and crew integration under extreme pressure. It was a complete and unmitigated disaster. Zyler monitored the simulation from the observation deck, his console displaying the flow of commands and the status of both crews. Captain Vorlag was in command of the simulation. His approach was flawless in its execution of Cathar doctrine. He immediately delegated tasks with cold efficiency. Tessek's engineering team worked to contain the simulated reactor breach, their actions a symphony of practiced, logical steps. The Cathar tactical officers executed textbook defensive maneuvers, rerouting power to shields and calculating optimal firing solutions to minimize risk to the ship. It was precise, it was controlled, and it was failing. The simulated enemy was adaptive. It didn't follow predictable attack patterns. It targeted weaknesses the moment they appeared, exploiting the Cathar's methodical, defense-oriented strategy. The Stellaris' simulated shields were failing, hull integrity was plummeting, and the reactor breach was spreading. On the human side of the bridge, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was shouting, quick-fire exchanges of information, and what sounded to Zyler like a stream of creative profanity from pilot Jax. In the center of it all was Commander Rostova. She wasn't seated. She paced the small area behind the command chair like a caged predator. "Forget the breach," she suddenly yelled, her voice cutting through the cacophony. Her order directly contradicted Vorlag's primary command. "Maya, what's the maximum safe overload we can push through the secondary plasma conduits before they melt?" Engineer Maya's face was slick with sweat on the monitor. "Safe. Commander, there's no safe overload. We could maybe get 170% for 12 seconds before the whole system slags." "Give me 10 seconds," Rostova snapped. "Jax, prepare for a full power burn on my mark. I want you to vent the overloaded plasma directly through the aft maneuvering thrusters." The order was insane. It was the tactical equivalent of strapping a bomb to your own ship and lighting the fuse. It would cripple their own vessel, and there was no guarantee it would even work as a weapon. Captain Vorlag's voice cut in over the command channel, tight with fury. "Commander Rostova, you will countermand that order immediately. You are jeopardizing the entire ship based on a reckless gamble. Your plan is getting us killed slowly, Captain." Rostova's voice was ice. "I'm opting for a chance to get us killed quickly, or maybe, just maybe, to survive. It's my turn to roll the dice." She didn't wait for his approval. "Now, Maya, Jax, burn." On Zyler's display, the simulation went haywire. The ship's energy signature spiked to impossible levels. A massive, uncontrolled jet of plasma erupted from the stern of the simulated Stellaris, lancing out toward the enemy vessel. The Stellaris itself was thrown into a violent, uncontrolled spin. Critical system failures cascaded across the board. But the plasma jet, a desperate, suicidal move, struck the enemy ship's engines. The hostile vessel was crippled, the attack stopped, the simulation ended. Result: mission objective achieved. Ship status critically damaged. Crew survival probability 34%. The debriefing was frigid. Vorlag stood stiffly, his carapace the color of a thundercloud. "Your maneuver was a flagrant violation of protocol, Commander. It was an act of insubordination and utter recklessness. You sacrificed the ship's integrity for a 1 in 1,000 chance." "And it worked," Rostova countered, her arms crossed. She was unrepentant. "Your perfect by-the-book strategy was letting the enemy bleed us dry. They were predictable in their unpredictability. They always hit our weakest point. So I created a new weakness, a much bigger one, and made it a weapon. It's called thinking outside the box, Captain. You can't win a fight against a chaotic opponent by being rigid." "We do not roll the dice with the lives of our crew," Vorlag bit back, his mandibles clicking sharply. Every time we engage the drive, we're rolling the dice, Rostova said, her voice low and intense. Every time we enter an uncharted system, we're betting our lives. The difference is you want a game of perfect logic, like your Cathar strategy games. I'm playing poker. It's about bluffing, about risk, and knowing when to go all in. You saved the rulebook. I saved the ship. The argument was left unresolved, a schism in their command structure that was now undeniable. Xyler left the debriefing more disturbed than ever. It wasn't just Rostova's methods, it was her justification. She saw value in chaos. She embraced unpredictability as a tool. The Cathar had spent millennia trying to eliminate unpredictable variables, to build a society of perfect order and function. The humans, it seemed, cultivated it. They nurtured it, and they placed it at the heart of their command philosophy. Xyler felt an overwhelming need for data, for some framework to understand this alien mindset. He decided to seek out the one human who seemed most capable of introspection. Eris Thorn. He found the doctor in the medical bay, calibrating a bioscanner. "Doctor," Xyler began, foregoing the usual pleasantries, "I require your analysis of Commander Rostova's cognitive processes." Her actions in the simulation were a logical contradiction. She initiated a self-destructive act to achieve a constructive outcome. Thorn finished his calibration and turned, leaning against the scanner. He sighed, a weary sound. "It's not a contradiction to her, Xyler. It's a cost-benefit analysis. A 34% chance of survival is better than a 0% chance." The Cathar approach was maximizing the time until doom. Eva's approach was to force a conclusion, win or lose. But the disregard for her own simulated vessel, for the crew, it was cold. Was it? Thorn raised an eyebrow. Or was it the ultimate act of a commander? To make a decision so terrible that no one else has to? I've served with her for 10 years. I once saw her amputate a crewman's leg with a cutting torch to free him from a collapsed bulkhead, with no anesthetic. It was brutal, horrifying, and it saved his life. An hour later, she was sitting by his bedside, holding his hand and telling him jokes to keep his spirits up. Is that a contradiction? Xyler's antennae drooped slightly. Yes, it is. One act is one of calculated violence. The other is of profound empathy. They cannot logically originate from the same core programming. That's because we're not programmed, Thorn said softly. We're a messy, contradictory bundle of instincts and intellect, all wrestling for control. We are capable of incredible cruelty and breathtaking kindness, sometimes in the same day. Eva is more human than most. The humor is her way of holding on to her own humanity. It's the tether that lets her go into that cold, dark place where the hard decisions are made and still find her way back. Without the laughter, the ruthlessness would consume her. Without the ruthlessness, the laughter would be meaningless. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Xyler stood in silence for a long time, the hum of the bioscanner filling the space between them. Thorn's explanation was the most coherent he had yet received, but it was not comforting. It replaced a puzzle with a terrifying truth. There was no core programming to understand. There was no single, unifying logic. There was only the chaos of human nature, a force that could be as creative as it was destructive. And the Stellaris was hurtling through the void, with that very chaos at its helm. Their arrival at the Cygnus X1 Nebula was a silent, awesome event. The view from the forward observatory was like looking into the mind of a furious god. Vast curtains of incandescent gas, crimson and sapphire, twisted around pillars of dark matter, all of it illuminated from within by the light of newborn stars. It was beautiful, but it was a violent beauty. As they drew closer, following the compromised navigation plan, the ship began to feel wrong. A low-level vibration thrummed through the deck plates, a dissonant chord under the ship's steady hum. Tessic's engineering team reported minor energy fluctuations across multiple systems. "It is the nebula," the engineer reported to the bridge, his voice tight with strain. "The rhythmic energy signatures Captain Vorlag detected are resonating with the ship's power conduits. It is like striking a tuning fork next to another of the same frequency." "Are we in any danger?" Vorlag's voice was calm, but Xyler, who had learned to read the subtle shifts in his commander's tone, detected a current of concern. The fluctuations are within acceptable tolerance, Tessic stated. For now, I advise we proceed no further. We're not getting clear readings from here, Rostova countered from her station. We need to get closer to triangulate the source. Before Vorlag could respond, a sudden, jarring lurch threw everyone against their restraints. Red alert klaxons blared on the Cathar side of the bridge, a series of urgent, high-pitched chimes. The human alarms followed a second later, a loud, obnoxious whooping sound. "Report!" Vorlag and Rostova shouted in unison. "Impact!" Jax called out from the helm. "Starboard side, Section 7. Something small came out of the gas cloud too fast to track." "Damage control teams, report," Vorlag commanded. Tessic's voice came over the comm, audibly panicked for the first time Xyler could ever recall. "It's a cascade." The impact was minor, but the harmonic resonance, it amplified the power surge through our primary systems. "Multiple circuit failures, energy grid is unstable. I am losing control of the flow regulators." Xyler watched in horror as, on the main schematic, entire sections of the Cathar design systems flickered from green to red. Their systems were a marvel of efficiency, every component perfectly integrated with the next. But that integration was now their greatest weakness. A failure in one place was becoming a failure everywhere. On the human side of the schematic, the lights were also flashing, but the pattern was different. Systems blinked out, but backup relays, clunky and inefficient by Cathar standards, kicked in. Their design was redundant, messy, with multiple fallbacks. It lacked elegance, but it possessed a stubborn resilience. "Our systems are holding," Maya reported, her voice strained. "But the Cathar grid is collapsing. If it goes, it'll take the primary reactor with it." Jax let out a low whistle. "That's not ideal. Anyone know how to give a starship a good kick?" he muttered, the comment a bizarre island of gallows humor in a sea of rising panic. Xyler flinched at the remark. Even now, they joked. "Tessic, what is your solution?" Vorlag demanded, his voice a low growl of controlled urgency. "We must perform a full diagnostic and reboot of the core systems," the engineer replied, his speech clipped. "It will take at least 3 hours. We will be powerless and adrift." "Adrift in a nebula that's actively attacking us," Rostova said, her voice sharp. "Not an option. There has to be another way." She was already moving, striding toward the engineering console on the human side of the bridge, her face a mask of intense concentration. The ship lurched again, more violently this time. On the view screen, the source of the problem became terrifyingly clear. The nebula was not just gas and dust. It was filled with crystalline structures, some as small as a fist, others as large as an asteroid. They pulsed with an internal light, a rhythm that was now visibly in sync with the ship's flickering power. One of the smaller crystals, drawn in by the Stellaris' energy field, had been the source of the impact. They hadn't stumbled into a natural phenomenon. They had flown into a trap, a vast, intricate web of energy-leaching crystals, waiting for a powered vessel to wander into its embrace. Vorlag's mandibles were splayed wide in a Cathar expression of shock and horror. All his caution, all his meticulous planning, had been for nothing. The universe had presented them with a problem so far outside their experience that their protocols were useless. "Full reverse," Vorlag ordered, his voice strained. "Get us out of the field." "Negative, Captain," Jax replied, his hands flying across his console. "The resonance has us locked in. It's like we're caught in a tractor beam. The more power I shunt to the engines, the stronger the pull gets. We're being drained." The cold reality of their situation settled over the bridge. They were trapped. Their power was being siphoned away by a silent, crystalline predator. Tessic's plan of a 3-hour reboot was a death sentence. Vorlag's order to retreat was impossible. They were caught in a web of their own making, lured in by their scientific curiosity. Vorlag convened an immediate emergency command council, linking the bridge with key personnel across the ship. The faces of his Cathar officers were grim, their carapaces dark with anxiety. The humans, by contrast, looked tense but focused, their expressions a mixture of fear and fierce determination. "Tessic, present your analysis," Vorlag began, his tone formal despite the crisis. "The conclusion is unavoidable," the engineer stated flatly. "The crystalline field functions as a massive capacitor, drawing power from any active energy source within its matrix. The more energy we expend, the faster we are drained and the stronger its hold on us becomes. Our only logical course of action is to enter a state of total energy conservation. We must shut down all non-essential systems, including the main drive. We will broadcast a repeating, low-power distress signal. We will conserve life support and wait for rescue. Wait. Wait for how long? Maya asked, her voice incredulous. We're 20 light-years from the nearest Allied outpost. A distress signal could take decades to reach anyone, assuming it even penetrates this nebula. It is the only course of action that maximizes our long-term survival probability, Tessic retorted. Any attempt to fight the field will only drain our power reserves faster, leading to our demise within hours. It was the quintessential Cathar solution, logical, patient, and passive. It accepted the parameters of the problem and sought to endure them. To Xyler, it sounded like a plan for a slow, lingering death, a tombstone floating in a sea of stars. Before Vorlag could affirm the plan, Rostova's voice cut across the channel, sharp and dismissive. She had been listening in from her station, and she strode into the center of the bridge now, her eyes blazing. "No," she said. The word was a physical force in the room. "Absolutely not. We are not going to sit here and die in the dark. That isn't a plan, it's a suicide pact with extra steps." "And your alternative, Commander?" Vorlag asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Another reckless gamble." "You're damn right it is," she shot back, her gaze sweeping over the assembled officers, Cathar and human alike. "Tessic's right about one thing. We can't outlast this thing. We can't fight it on its own terms. So we need to change the terms." She pointed to the schematic of the ship, which still showed their critical power situation. "The field is a capacitor. What happens when you overload a capacitor? It blows. It discharges violently." A tense silence fell as everyone processed her words. It was Eris Thorn who spoke first, his voice quiet. "Eva, what are you suggesting?" Rostova's eyes were like chips of ice. "I'm suggesting we stop trying to pull away. I'm suggesting we feed the beast until it chokes. We bypass the safety protocols on the main reactor, build to a controlled, supercritical state, and then vent the entire energy output in a single, omnidirectional burst. We turn the whole ship into a giant EMP bomb." The Cathar officers recoiled. Tessic's mandibles chattered in horrified disbelief. "That is madness. The feedback from such a discharge would vaporize every system on the ship. It would tear the ship apart. The structural integrity field would collapse." "It would," Rostova agreed calmly. "But for a microsecond, the overload would also shatter the crystalline structures in our immediate vicinity. It would create a shockwave, a temporary hole in the web. In that microsecond, before our own systems are fried, Jax will perform a cold thrust burn using the emergency compressed gas thrusters. It will push us out of the immediate danger zone. Then we deal with the fact that we're on a dead ship." "The chance of success is infinitesimal," Vorlag thundered. "You are proposing the deliberate destruction of this vessel on the hope of a miracle." "I'm proposing we choose our ending." Rostova's voice was low and deadly serious now, all trace of humor or levity gone. She was the strategist from the simulation, the ruthless commander who made the hard calls. "I would rather die in a flash of light, fighting, than suffocate over months in a silent tomb waiting for a rescue that will never come. Your plan offers a 1% chance of being found in 50 years. My plan offers a 10% chance of being alive in 5 minutes. From a tactical standpoint, my odds are better." Xyler watched, his mind reeling. She spoke of her own potential death, the death of everyone on board, with the detached calm of a mechanic discussing a faulty engine. The other humans didn't look horrified. They looked at her with a kind of awed respect. They understood. They accepted this logic, a logic born not of pure reason, but of a fierce, desperate will to live, even if it meant risking utter annihilation. To the Cathar, it was the ultimate insanity. To the humans, it was the only option left. Xyler's carapace shifted to a deep, alarmed shade of violet. This was the human paradox in its most extreme form, the complete willingness to destroy oneself for the slimmest chance of survival. It wasn't a contradiction. It was their defining trait, and it was about to decide all of their fates. The bridge of the Stellaris became the fault line of a species-wide schism. The Cathar crew, loyal to their commander and their ingrained philosophy, began implementing Tesic's energy conservation plan. They moved with grim, silent efficiency, their movements a funereal ballet. The humans, meanwhile, stood by their stations, a silent, defiant protest. They looked to Rostova, awaiting her command, their belief in her wild plan unwavering. The ship, caught between two opposing wills, hung dying in the crystalline web. Xyler felt himself torn. His training, his very being, screamed that Rostova's plan was illogical, emotional, and suicidal. It was an affront to every principle of Cathar thought. Yet, he could not dismiss the cold, hard numbers of her argument. A 10% chance of survival was statistically superior to a near-zero probability. The logic was sound, even if the method was terrifyingly alien. He accessed the ship's historical database, pulling up the files on human history that he had studied so intensely. He saw a species defined by such moments. A species that had crossed deadly oceans in flimsy wooden boats, not knowing if land existed on the other side. A species that had detonated the first atomic bombs, unleashing the power of the stars on their own planet, a gamble that could have ended their civilization. A species that had launched themselves into space on columns of controlled explosions. Their entire history was a series of insane gambles against impossible odds, and they were still here. They had survived. They had prospered. Their unpredictability, their willingness to risk everything, was not a flaw. It was their greatest evolutionary advantage. It was the survival mechanism their species had honed over millennia of hardship. This crystalline web was predictable. It was a static, logical trap. It was designed to counter a logical opponent who would try to pull away or shut down. It was not designed to counter an opponent who would try to blow themselves up. Rostova's chaos was the one variable the trap's creators would never have anticipated. Making a decision that went against every fiber of his being, Xyler approached the Cathar command platform where Vorlag stood, a stoic statue of defeated logic. "Captain," Xyler said, his synthesized voice quiet but firm, "I must respectfully disagree with the current course of action." Vorlag turned slowly, his dark eyes fixing on Xyler. "You, xenolinguist, you are siding with their madness." "I am siding with the data," Xyler replied, holding his ground. "I have analyzed the commander's proposal. The risk of catastrophic failure is 90%. However, the risk of failure under your plan is, functionally, 100%. The only difference is the time frame. Her proposal is tactically superior." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "We have spent this entire voyage trying to understand humanity, trying to fit them into our logical frameworks. We have failed. Perhaps it is time we stop trying to understand their methods and instead trust their results. Their entire history is proof that this madness works." Vorlag stared at him for a long, silent moment. Xyler could see the conflict in his eyes. The captain was a being of pure structure and order, being asked to embrace chaos as his only hope. It was like asking him to deny the existence of mathematics. But Vorlag was also a commander who had just led his ship into a trap, whose own flawless logic had failed him. Finally, with a soft, grinding sound of his mandibles that sounded like a soul breaking, Vorlag nodded. He opened a ship-wide channel. "Attention, all crew." His voice was heavy, laden with the weight of his decision. "I am countermanding my previous order. We will proceed with Commander Rostova's plan. All Cathar personnel will give the human command team their full and unconditional support. Vorlag out." The shift on the bridge was instantaneous. The funereal atmosphere was shattered, replaced by a surge of frantic, purposeful energy. Rostova didn't waste a second. "Let's get to work, people. Maya, you're with Tesic on the reactor bypass. I want you two to become best friends and figure out how to turn this ship into a firecracker. Jax, get to the helm. Your only job is to hit the gas the microsecond that blast wave passes us. Aris, get the medbay ready for anything. Xyler," she looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a commander or a joker, but a leader offering a place in her desperate charge. "I need you on communications. Monitor the blast dispersal and tell me the second we have a clear path." The next 30 minutes were the most intense of Xyler's life. He watched as humans and Cathar worked side by side, their differing philosophies merging into a single, desperate effort. Tessic, his logical mind recoiling at every step, nonetheless gave Maya the precise calculations she needed to create the controlled overload. Cathar engineers, accustomed to silent precision, found themselves working amidst the shouts and rapid-fire exchanges of their human counterparts. And through it all the humans joked. Their humor was darker now, sharper, a way of whistling in a graveyard of their own making. "Hey, Tessic," Maya called out from the reactor interface, sweat beading on her forehead. "If we screw this up, you think they'll name the new black hole after us?" Tessic just stared at her, his antennae twitching frantically. "Your humor is not processing at this time." On the bridge, Jax was strapped into the pilot's chair, his usual easy grin replaced by a taut line. He was flexing his hands, humming a tuneless, rhythmic beat. "Time to thread the needle, boss," he said into his comm, his voice tight but steady. Rostova stood in the center of the bridge, a still point in the hurricane of activity. Her face was calm, her eyes fixed on the main view screen showing the glittering, deadly crystals. She was the architect of this madness, and she would see it through. "All teams report," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Reactor bypass is in place," Maya reported. "We're building to supercritical, on your mark, Commander, and it's been an honor." "Compressed gas thrusters are primed," Jax said. "Ready to blow this pop stand." "Pathing is calculated," Xyler added, his own voice surprisingly steady. "I will monitor the shockwave propagation." Rostova took a deep breath. "All right, on my mark." "Good luck, everyone." She paused for a single, heartbeat-skipping second. "Mark!" The universe seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low, gut-wrenching groan emanated from the very soul of the ship. The lights didn't just flicker. They died, plunging the bridge into darkness, lit only by the emergency red running lights and the terrifying, beautiful glow of the nebula outside. A wave of pure energy, visible even on the sensors as a wall of screaming static, erupted from the Stellaris. It was not a beam or a blast. It was an instantaneous expansion of raw power. On the view screen, the nearest crystals, some the size of mountains, glowed incandescently for a fraction of a second, and then shattered into trillions of glittering shards. A shockwave, a ripple in spacetime itself, radiated outward. The ship screamed, a chorus of tearing metal and shrieking alarms. It was being torn apart from the inside by the feedback loop and battered from the outside by the very shockwave it had created. "Now, Jax." "Now," Rostova yelled into the blackness. "Engaging thrusters." A jolt, entirely different from the violent shaking, pushed Xyler deep into his seat. It was the gentle, firm push of the emergency thrusters, a puff of air in a hurricane. On the screen, the ship, now a dead husk, began to move. It drifted through the hole it had blown in the crystalline web, tumbling slowly through a newly created channel of glittering dust. Debris from the shattered crystals scraped along the hull with a sound like claws on metal. They were through. They were out of the web. And then there was silence. A profound, absolute silence, broken only by the ragged sound of people breathing in the dark. The ship was dead. No power, no engines, no life support save for the emergency reserves in their suits, but they were alive and they were free. A single, shaky laugh broke the silence. It was Jack's. It started as a chuckle and grew into a loud, whooping cry of pure, unadulterated relief. "Woo-hoo, we did it, we actually did it." His laughter was infectious. Maya's joined in, then Aris's over the comm. It was a ragged, hysterical sound, the sound of people who had stared into the abyss and spat in its eye. And then Xyler heard another sound. It was a strange, awkward noise from the Cathar command platform, a series of soft, rhythmic clicks and guttural chitters. It took him a moment to identify it. It was Captain Vorlag. He was trying to replicate the human expression of relief. He was trying to laugh. It sounded painful, alien, and utterly bizarre. But the intent, the shared emotion in that moment of impossible survival was clearer than any words. It was the sound of a rigid, logical mind shattered and being rebuilt into something new. In the long hours that followed, as emergency power was slowly restored, and damage control teams began the monumental task of piecing their broken ship back together, a new kind of quiet settled over the crew. It wasn't the tense silence of before, but a comfortable one, born of shared trauma and mutual respect. Xyler found Commander Rostova in the forward observatory. The emergency lights cast long shadows, and the massive viewport, now scarred with plasma burns, looked out onto the receding nebula. It no longer looked beautiful. It looked like a graveyard they had narrowly escaped. Rostova was just staring out at it, her arms wrapped around herself. The iron-hard commander was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and vulnerable. "Were you afraid?" Xyler asked softly, standing beside her. She didn't look at him, but she nodded. "Terrified," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never been so scared in my life. I was sure it was going to kill us all. That my choice was going to be the end." "Yet you made jokes before it began," Xyler stated. It was no longer an accusation or a point of confusion. It was a genuine question, a request for understanding. Rostova finally turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "The jokes, they're the armor, Xyler. They're how we keep the fear from paralyzing us. It's a way of telling the universe that even if it kills us, it can't break our spirit." She gestured back toward the bridge. "And the ruthlessness, the willingness to blow up our own ship, that's the weapon. It's the thing you use when the armor isn't enough. You need both to walk through the fire. You can't have one without the other." And in that moment, in the quiet, broken shell of their ship, Xyler finally understood. He had been trying to separate two integrated parts of a whole. He had seen a contradiction, a paradox, where there was only a complex, powerful survival mechanism. It wasn't logic versus emotion. It was logic and emotion fused together into something stronger than either could be alone. The laughter wasn't a mask for the chaos. It was the engine of it. It was what gave them the strength to be ruthless, the courage to be reckless, the sheer, insane audacity to gamble with their own lives and win. "We Cathar," Xyler said, his own voice filled with a new kind of wonder, "we built our society to eliminate chaos. We view it as a flaw, a bug in the system of existence. You have learned to ride it, to harness it as a tool, as a weapon. It's a messy way to live," Rostova said with a small, weary smile, "but it gets the job done." Xyler looked from her face to the nebula and then to the endless expanse of stars beyond. Their mission had been to make first contact, to bridge the gap between two species. He realized now they had been trying to build that bridge with mathematics and linguistics alone. The true bridge, the one forged in fire and fear and laughter, had just been built. It wasn't founded on a shared understanding of logic, but on a mutual respect for their profoundly different, yet equally valid paths to survival. The galaxy was vast and filled with terrors, both logical and chaotic. And for the first time, Xyler felt that perhaps with these strange, unpredictable, laughing allies, they might just be ready for all of it.